Hello and welcome to part 5 of my Tony Hawk's Pro Skater Marathon, where today we're taking a look at potentially the most hated entry in the entire series. It's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. I've actually played this game a ton, and probably given it more of a chance than anyone else, but after all that, have I found anything positive to say about the game? Well, let's take a look at it together. The first thing I want to point out in this review is that despite this being called Pro Skater 5, it isn't the 5th entry in the series and is actually the 10th main series entry, released after Underground, Underground 2, American Wasteland, Project A and Proving Ground, and the first one in the main series not developed by Neversoft and instead developed by Robomodo. The reason I've not talked about the previous games and jumped straight to Pro Skater 5 is simply because I want to get this marathon done before the new game comes out, and plus, I personally think the Pro Skater branded games are the height of quality for the series, so it makes sense to stick to those for now. The reason I want to point this out is that in the 5 games prior to the release of Pro Skater 5, there was a ton of features added to the series which I've not talked about. Stuff like mapping your actual face to a creator skater, improved creator park features, getting off of your board and running around on foot, riding and driving other vehicles, an expansive story mode, many more tricks like wall slapping and Naruto spinning, the return of the classic mode which could be played in co-op, and a greater emphasis on having levels return from older games. These are all things which were at some point featured in the series after Pro Skater 4. But the vast majority of these new features were completely stripped in Pro Skater 5. And even some things that were featured in the old games have been removed, such as the trick extensions which allowed you to do flatland tricks in Pro Skater 4. And this makes Pro Skater 5 feel much more basic and bare bones than the games we've been used to for a while now. You could argue that this stripping back of features was done on purpose. After all, this is Pro Skater 5, right? So it makes sense that this game is going back to the series' roots and focusing on the basics. But I don't think this was an intentional thing that the developers were aiming to do, and it was more so a case of them not having the budget to do anything else, as well as having to rush the game out because the Tony Hawk game license was expiring. Which in the end they didn't even need to do, because Activision now have the Tony Hawk license back and are publishing the remake of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, so they didn't even need to do such a rush job with this game. Before we start picking apart what makes this game bad though, I first want to point out some things that I actually like about Pro Skater 5, because even though it's a terrible game, it does do a few things pretty well. The major new thing this game introduced to the series is the ability to jump into the air and then slam your board down in the middle of the jump to land more accurately. When the game first came out, you had to hold triangle in order to pull this move off, but the issue there is that you would also hold triangle to ready yourself for a grind. So this resulted in doing the slam move before you were actually ready to drop to the grind rail, and you would mess yourself up because of this. However, with an update made to the game, this ability can be assigned to only being activated when you double tap triangle instead. Which is way better because you wouldn't activate it by accident, and you know what? I actually ended up liking this ability. Sure, it's completely unrealistic and you could argue that it takes away from some of the skill of timing jumps to get the right distance, but I think it gives you a slightly better degree of control over your character, which in this game at least, was appreciated. I also kinda liked the ranking system the game implements, where for completing goals you'll get a bit of experience, and by leveling up you'll unlock new cosmetics to customize your skater with. The issue with this system comes from the fact that this is the main way that you feel a sense of progression in the game, whereas it should have been a side element on top of a greater structure. In Pro Skater 2, for example, the sense of progression is implemented by collecting cash icons and completing goals which also reward you with cash, tying all of the elements of the game together and giving you a focus to collect cash. Then that cash could be spent on stats, decks, and new tricks, which made it feel like you were getting better and being rewarded cosmetically too. With Pro Skater 5 though, there's no cash, and you just get this experience for doing goals, which unlocks a random cosmetic. It feels a lot less personal, and it feels like there's less to do in the game because there's no cash collectibles hidden throughout the levels either. Completing each goal also rewards you with a stat point to make your skater better, which is fine, and Pro Skater 4 also did this. But the problem here is that you literally don't even need to upgrade your stats. It seems to make such a minuscule amount of difference, and even with your stats at 0, you have insanely good balance, air, spin, and speed. Because you start the game already feeling like a skating god, there's no incentive to improve your stats, which makes it unrewarding unlocking the stat points. Notice how I was supposed to be talking about positives here, and somehow I sidetracked myself into being negative. This game will do that to you. Perhaps the biggest positive I have for this game is that I really liked how it uses the same structure as Pro Skater 4, having you enter the level in a free skate state where you aren't on a timer and can just skate around to your heart's content, but then you have goals which can be found and activated in the level. But unlike in Pro Skater 4, the skate and combo letters aren't a specific goal and are just placed in the level for you to collect while free skating. There's also a number of hidden things to find, like boxes or crystals, as well as a hidden tape and DVD. So despite not having cash icons to find, it does at least give you a selection of items to scout out and collect, making the free skate element of the game actually have a purpose. I kinda wish Pro Skater 4 had done this, to be honest, because looking back on it, there was no reason to have the skate and combo letters assigned to a goal, rather than just have them in the level to begin with. You can also do wall plants in this game, which actually hasn't been possible in any of the Pro Skater games we've covered so far. This is a really handy ability that debuted in Underground, where you can jump into a wall and then push yourself off of it in the opposite direction, allowing you to continue a combo even after hitting into a wall. That about sums up all of the positive things that I've got to say about Pro Skater 5, so let's now move on to the meat of the review and talk about why this game is regarded as being so bad. This is gonna be rough. So to ease the pain a little bit, let's have a round of Created Skater or Realer Skater. There is no Creator Skater, is there? Damn. Okay, so to say that Pro Skater 5 doesn't have any kind of Creator Skater is technically wrong. You can make a customised skater, but rather than the older games where you can customise specific elements of a skater's face, hair, clothes, the colour of the clothes, scale options, tattoos, and way more, in Pro Skater 5 you instead choose from a pre-made head and a body, and that's it. This means you can't make a skater that looks like yourself, but you're basically choosing from a selection of pre-made skaters, but you can swap the heads with other pre-made skaters. It's straight up lame, and because so much of the game's sense of progression relies on unlocking these heads and bodies, well, it might as well have no sense of progression at all. It doesn't help that you technically aren't even making a custom skater. What I mean by this is that you know how in the older games you had a specific character slot that was taken up by a custom skater? In Pro Skater 5, you're actually choosing one of the pro skaters featured in the game and customising them. Meaning if you're playing as a custom skater, you're actually playing as a pro skater and not your own character. It's really weird to wrap your head around, and I don't know why on earth they thought this was a good idea. So yeah, they somehow ruined the Creator Skater mode in this game, despite it being available all the way back in Pro Skater 2, which, might I remind you, was released in the year 2000 on the PS1. Pro Skater 5 was released 15 years later and was on the PS4, and yet somehow has worse customization features. I mean, it takes a real lack of care to accomplish that kind of feat. So, a big thing when this game first came out is that it had online multiplayer support, which allowed you to skate around the levels with groups of other players, as well as take part in co-op goals and play matches of Trick Attack and other game modes together. Now, I went into this believing that the online functions of this game wouldn't work because it was a big thing a few years ago that the servers were turned off for the game. But apparently, they're back on again now, and for some reason nobody's talking about it. I was able to start a level like normal and be skating around with other players, as well as being able to see the online leaderboards too. Who knows if the servers will stay online forever though, and despite it being great that the online still works, I had no success with getting anybody to join me for an actual online match or co-op goal. It seems the few players who are still active just want to skate around together in the free skate mode, which is a bit of a shame really. I'm hoping that the upcoming remake of Pro Skater 1 and 2 allows you to play through the game in co-op as well, because can you imagine how friggin' awesome that would be? And with the game most likely having a bigger player base, I would imagine that people would actually be up for doing that too, unlike in Pro Skater 5. Even though the online element of Pro Skater 5 is interesting, I feel like far too much of a focus was put onto it and it becomes detrimental to the experience with the game, and this is because it was basically built to be exclusively played with other people online. This means that if you play a later level in the game which has no active players, or if you just want to play the game in single player, the levels will feel completely uninhabited. What are supposed to be levels filled with other people skating around and chatting to each other will be eerily quiet and lacking in life. The problem is that there's no NPC characters walking around like in Pro Skater 3, and there's not even any cars driving around like there was in Pro Skater 1. Meaning that the single player experience with Pro Skater 5 is even more lacking in life and activity than Pro Skater 1 was. It just looks and feels completely dead at times, and this issue only exists because they put such a massive emphasis on playing the game online, but didn't take into account the fact that the player base will one day completely drop off, and also the fact that some people either don't have the internet or just want to play the game in single player. The overall issue here is that they absolutely should not have made a game with such a huge focus on an online multiplayer element, knowing full well that the game probably wouldn't have the biggest community. It's basically the equivalent of if Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 would have had no career mode and the entire game was just the multiplayer options and the creator park mode. It just feels unfinished and lacking in any real content. Sure, having the online elements is nice, but they needed to make the game with the single player as the focus. Put some moving parts in there like NPCs and cars to make the world feel alive, and then flesh it out even more with online elements. The way that they've actually done it though is kinda lazy, because they're basically relying on other people to play the game to make the levels feel full, rather than actually making the levels feel full to begin with, like they should have done. Another way in which the online focus ruins the game is that there are absolutely no local multiplayer options. You heard that right, this is a Tony Hawk game that has 0 split screen options. That is a straight up sin. A sin against humanity. And if you think about it, it really is such a shame that they didn't implement this, because even if the online servers eventually got turned off or nobody was playing it anymore, it wouldn't have mattered as much, because you could have still done all of the co-op and competitive multiplayer stuff locally instead. This whole online thing might not seem like such a big deal, but I honestly think that because this online functionality was embedded so deep into the DNA of this game, it affects so many things and ultimately takes away from what made the original Pro Skater games so engrossing and replayable. The issues with this game go much deeper than just the ones caused by the online aspects though. There's so many small issues that build up into a mountain of problems that it's difficult even knowing where to begin. I consider myself a huge fan of the Tony Hawk series, so to see a game with such a low level of effort and attention put into it genuinely makes me sad. I gave this game more of a chance than anyone else, even to the point where I got the Platinum Trophy on it, and I mean, how many other people can say that? So with me having quite a lot of experience with the game, let's just quickfire go through some of the many problems with it, shall we? Firstly, the soundtrack is absolutely nothing like it was in the other Pro Skater games. Instead of having a selection of hip-hop, punk and rock, it opts for this weird blend of dance and pop rock, which in my opinion doesn't work at all. There's also way fewer songs here than in some of the other games in the series, like Pro Skater 4, and you can't even see a track list or customize the soundtrack either. So if you hear a song you like, you can't even look it up to see who made it. And this also means that the artists didn't really receive any proper credit either, aside from being mentioned in the credits that is, but who's gonna look there? The controller mapping is just completely screwed. While doing tricks is the same as the previous games, the way you move now is that you push the board by pressing R2 and you stop or slow down by pressing L2, making it feel more like you're driving a car than skating. The issue I have with this though is that if you're making a game that's a continuation to an old and beloved series of games, you keep the fundamental controls the same. You don't change stuff like this that drastically alters the feel of the game. It just feels like they had no respect at all for the older games by changing this, and it's just one of the many slaps in the face this game gives you. The special trick system in this game is so watered down from the previous games too, and I despise it. I mean, in the greater picture this isn't a big deal, but it's just a situation where I'm left baffled as to what the developers were thinking with stuff like this. Rather than building up the special meter by doing standard tricks and combos and then doing a unique button combination to pull off a unique special trick for a particular skater, like in the older games, instead, in Pro Skater 5, you build up the special meter and then activate a special mode which turns every single one of your standard tricks into special tricks for a limited time. This is just boring by comparison, and it doesn't require any skill, and most of the special tricks are exactly the same for every skater too. You remember how in Pro Skater 1 when you bailed there was no way of speeding up the animation of getting back onto your board, and it took ages too, which interrupted the flow of the game? Well, in Pro Skater 5 there isn't even an animation for getting onto the board, and instead when you bail, you ragdoll and then the screen fades to white and you just magically appear on the board again. So now, not only does it take ages and you can't speed it up by button mashing like in Pro Skater 2, but there's not even an animation of getting back onto the board like there was in Pro Skater 1. It's crazy to me that they made this game and released it in the year 2015, and yet somehow it's worse than a game that was released in 1999 on way inferior hardware. You could argue that this happens with a lot of games, but the difference with the Tony Hawk series is that for a long time every single game was an improvement, or at least changed something drastic to make it interesting to play in a different way. But then, all of a sudden we get to Pro Skater 5, and there's this massive decline in quality. Like, what happened here? You know what, this getting back onto your board animation being missing probably won't bother you that much, and do you know why? Because you won't bail. Remember that element of the game where you bailed if you failed to hold your balance while in a manual or grind, and this basically formed the basis of the risk versus reward gameplay that made holding combos so satisfying? Yeah, if you fail to hold your balance in a manual or grind in Pro Skater 5, you don't bail. Sure, it ends your combo, but you still get to keep all of your score, so it doesn't really matter. Plus, your balance is so good, even with zero stats, it almost feels like a magnet is pulling your balance back to the center. Really, the only way to bail here is to mess up your landing or to do one too many tricks in the middle of a jump. But that won't happen that often at all if you're familiar with the games. Another thing is that there's also all of these stupid power-ups featured in almost every level too, which in my opinion add nothing to the experience and a lot of the time just get in the way. Like in the rooftops level, you can double jump to make your way around, but it just feels like it was implemented as a lazy workaround to make it so the developers didn't need to make lines going from one rooftop to another. Then there's this in Mega Park where your character will turn huge and it's used to smash through some glass to get to an underground area. But after doing this, you stay massive and take up way too much of the screen. As far as I'm aware, this is only used to get into this one secret area, and it has no other function. So number 1, why is this power-up placed in more than one position in the level? And number 2, why do you stay big for so long after collecting it? There's also this thing in Mountain, where when you're manual, you'll use ice powers to go really fast, but it literally adds nothing to the game, so you're just left wondering what the point of it all is. And on top of this, there's way more pointless gimmicky stuff like this too, but I'm not gonna go into it all here. Remember how finishing the old games as a certain character unlocked a live action video of them skating, which not only gave you a reward, but bookended the experience with a logical ending? Yeah, in Pro Skater 5 the game kinda just ends. Nothing happens. You don't unlock a video or see the credits or anything. It's like the game never really ends and you're just supposed to keep going forever. And here's another thing, why is the goddamn logo for the game on these loading screens so low quality? What, they didn't have a high quality PNG of their own logo for these screens? And the same goes for these button icons on the goal screens too. Why are they so pixely? What is this? What is this? Jeez, it's just like every single little thing with this game is flawed in some way. I've got no idea what was going on in this game's development, but some bad stuff must have been going down to come out with a game like this. I could literally keep going talking about all of the different problems I have with this game for ages. It's a minefield of rubbish, it really is, and I would almost recommend that you play it for yourself just to see how bad it is. It's insane. Something which you've probably noticed when watching all of the footage I've shown here is that the game is pretty damn ugly. They went for this cartoony art style for the game, which was obviously done because of the lack of a budget, and it just doesn't look good. I mean, look at Riley Hawk's hair, it's like brown mush. There are some times where if you squint, the game looks okay, but I mean, come on, we should expect better, and to be honest, we deserve better from this series. Again, something else I probably should have mentioned by now is the fact that all of the goals in the game are repeated many times in other levels. There's barely any examples of any unique objectives in the game at all, which makes the game feel so monotonous it's insulting. Even when the game has a decent idea, like with this big head goal where you need to keep landing combos to stop your head getting so big that it blows up, it's repeated so much that it becomes a chore. There's also this goal where you need to get rid of all of these oversized balls from a pool. Again, this sounds like a good idea, but it's repeated again and again, and it becomes such a drag. Pro Skater 4 had kinda basic levels compared to the older games, but it made up for it with interesting and unique objectives in each level that made them memorable. But in Pro Skater 5, not only does it have uninteresting levels, but it also doesn't have any unique objectives, so there's just nothing going on here. There is one memorable objective in the game though. Just take a look at this raw, unedited gameplay of this goal where you need to get rid of all of these sheep from a bowl. Just bask in the glorious frame rate and take it all in. The last thing I'll say about the game that's negative is really the final nail in the coffin, and that is that the levels are just so bland and generic. There's practically nothing to even say about them. Even the ones like Wild West, which you would expect to be interesting judging from the theming, just feel so basic and samey. There's nothing to make each level stand out from the last, and they even resorted to having to rip off previously existing levels, like with School 3 being a clone of School 2, the bunker being a clone of the hangar, and the underground being super similar to elements of them all. This was obviously done on purpose and it's more of a reference to the older levels, but in a game that was supposed to be a continuation of the series and not a remake or reimagining, it comes across as a bit lazy. Every single element of the game that could be considered good, or at the very least acceptable, such as the character roster which features the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Lil Wayne, Tyler the Creator, and King Graham from the King's Quest game series, is either completely overshadowed by the metric ton of flaws elsewhere in the game, or it's directly let down by an inherent flaw within the good element. So with the character roster, for example, even though what we have here is pretty good, what's with the lack of pro skaters returning from the older games? I get that they want to showcase some more modern skaters, and of course I'm up for that and think that's awesome, but from the original 4 Pro Skater games, there's only Tony Hawk and Andrew Reynolds who return, and I just find that utterly perplexing. The one single aspect of the game I'll give some major credit to is with the Creator Park mode. This is quite significantly better than any of the previous versions of the mode I've used in the other Pro Skater games. And the fact that you can share your created parks online as well as download other people's is amazing and gives the game a huge boost in content. Although, I do have to admit that I never actually successfully played anybody else's park because it just kept coming up with errors. So maybe even with the servers being back online, this element of the game still doesn't work. So I suppose we'll just ignore the fact that this might not work anymore. The actual park creator is pretty great too. There's tons of objects to place which have multiple skins to change the designs. You can freely move the camera around to get a better look at the park and instantly enter a skate mode to test stuff out before instantly going back to the creation mode. The levels no longer have to be squares and you can choose level templates that are based on the main levels in the game. You can place skate and combo letters as well as a hidden tape and DVD, making the park have actual completion criteria, which is awesome. You can freely place objects wherever you want rather than having them snap to a grid, and they actually did a really solid job with this. While it is the best Creator Park mode in a Pro Skater game, at least so far, there is room for improvement here, and I really hope that the developers of the upcoming remake of Pro Skater 1 and 2 look at this mode and implement some of these improvements. So firstly, it would be awesome if you could make actual objectives in the levels, like finding a number of objects or getting a high Pro and 6 score. It would also be great to be able to customize the height and width of objects to place them in smaller or larger areas where the preset sized object wouldn't fit. You also can't rotate objects freely, and rather they snap to set positions, which always ends up making the park feel like it consists entirely of right angles, which is a bit of a shame. And you also can't highlight multiple objects at the same time and move them all at once, which makes things a bit clumsy if you move in an entire section of the level. An aspect of the Creator Park mode which is actually missing from the older games is that you can't place custom markers for where you'll start if you're playing horse, and you can't place the crown spawn locations for King of the Hill either, which is a bit weird. Regardless of the complaints I have about this mode though, I actually had quite a bit of fun messing around with the Creator Park here, and my girlfriend actually spent quite a while making a pretty nice park. And I'm looking forward to seeing what she can do in the new game with the hopefully even more expanded Creator Park mode. So we've ended the video on a bit of a high there, but overall, this game is an absolute train wreck, and it's actually been taken off of digital storefronts too, so the only way you can actually play it for yourself is to get it physically. I do also want to point out, just in case anyone does want to play this game for themselves, that there's reports out there that say that this game doesn't work anymore because you need to be online to play it, and that information is actually completely incorrect. The game is fully playable in single player, regardless of whether you're connected to the internet or not. It's a bad game, so you probably don't want to play it. I think this image sums up the whole thing. Tony says disaster. Well, you know what? Rob says disaster too. I'm putting Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 at the very bottom of the list in my series ranking, where it'll most likely stay forever, or at least, I hope it will. Like I've said throughout this video, I've really only scratched the surface of why this game is bad, but to go through everything would mean I'd be making an hour-long video essay on the topic, and I just don't think that Pro Skater 5 is worth that. It's not the worst game I've ever played, and it is at times somewhat enjoyable. But that comes down to the fact that it uses the old games as a basis, and because of that, it has moments of feeling distantly similar to those old games. But there's just piles and piles of utter trash on top of that, and it makes the game almost laughably bad. It's not quite funny enough to be so bad it's good, so it's just one of those games that occupies this space where it's just bad and not worth your time. The only reason to ever play this is if you're a big fan of the series and you're just morbidly curious about just how bad it is. And that's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. Now, you might be thinking that my journey through the Pro Skater games is over, but when I said I wanted to look at all of the console Pro Skater games, I meant all of them. So there's actually 2 more games left in the Pro Skater series that I've got left to cover before the upcoming remake of Pro Skater 1 and 2 comes out. And it might interest you to know that that upcoming remake isn't the first time that Pro Skater 1 and 2 have been remade. In fact, it'll be the 3rd time. So, join me in the next video where we're going to be taking a look at the first remake of the original games, with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X for the original Xbox, which I'm actually really looking forward to because I've never played this before and I've been wanting to for years and years now. But until then, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon, and leave a comment down below letting me know if you've played Pro Skater 5 and what you thought of it. And until next time, bye!